The crystal champagne flute shattered in my hand as I watched my father press his lips against a woman who wasn't my mother. Blood trickled down my wrist, but the physical pain barely registered. The annual charity gala, meant to celebrate our family's wellness center, had just become a stage for betrayal. I'm Rosalie, and until 30 seconds ago, I thought I knew what kind of man my father was. Oh God, you're bleeding. Tom appeared beside me, napkin already in hand. He tried to wrap it around my palm, but I pulled away, my eyes fixed on the scene unfolding across the ballroom. Leave it, I whispered. The sharp sting felt appropriate, matching the acid rising in my throat. My mother stood frozen near the donation table, her emerald dress catching the light from the chandeliers. She'd spent weeks planning this event, making sure everything was perfect. Now she was watching her marriage crumble between the silent auction items and the open bar. Someone needs to stop this, an elderly donor muttered behind me, but no one moved. They all just stared, champagne glasses hovering midair. As my father, respected businessman Daniel, continued his public display with his much younger assistant, the woman I'd watched bring him coffee every morning for the past year. Rosalie, please let me help with your hand, Tom insisted. I finally looked down. Blood had dripped onto my black dress, creating a constellation of dark spots against the fabric. Did you know? I asked him, my voice barely audible. What? No, of course not. Daniel! My mother's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp as a blade. The room fell silent. I believe you've made your point. My father pulled away from his assistant, but kept his arm around her waist. He had the audacity to smile. Monica, darling, let's not make a scene. A scene? I stepped forward, glass crunching under my heels. You're worried about a scene now, Rosalie, he warned, using that tone he'd always used when I was being difficult. This is neither the time nor the place. When is the right time to watch you destroy our family? The words came out louder than I'd intended, bouncing off the marble floors and crystal decorations. His assistant, Evelyn, I remembered suddenly, had the decency to look uncomfortable. But my father's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, something cruel. Your mother and I have been discussing this for months, he lied smoothly. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. I looked at my mother. She was shaking her head, tears threatening to spill from her carefully made-up eyes. That's not true, she whispered. That's not true at all. Monica, please, he sighed, as if she were being unreasonable. We both know this isn't working anymore. The wellness center needs new direction, fresh ideas. Evelyn has some excellent proposals. The wellness center, my mother's voice cracked. This isn't about the business, Daniel. This is about us, our family. Everything is about business, he replied coldly. You've never understood that. Something snapped inside me then. All those years of watching him manipulate and control, always under the guise of knowing what was best for everyone. I stepped closer, blood still dripping from my hand. You want to talk business, I said quietly. Let's talk about how you've been siphoning money from the center's accounts. Or should we discuss those questionable tax write-offs? His face paled slightly. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I've been handling the books with Mom for the past year. Did you think I wouldn't notice? The room had gone completely silent. Even the waiters had stopped moving. We'll discuss this at home, he said through clenched teeth. No, I replied, feeling strangely calm. We won't, because there won't be a home to discuss it in after tonight. I turned to the stunned crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but I believe this evening's festivities are over. Please direct any donations to my mother directly from now on. She's the only one you can trust with your money. As the guests began to whisper and move toward the exits, I caught my father's eye one last time. The look he gave me wasn't of a parent betrayed by their child. It was the look of a man calculating his next move. And in that moment, I knew this was just the beginning. 3 days after the gala, I found my mother sitting in her darkened office, staring at the wall of certificates and awards she'd earned over the years. The wellness center felt hollow, like a stage after the final curtain call. "The board wants an emergency meeting," I said, flicking on the lights. "Dad's calling for a vote of no confidence." She didn't turn around. "Of course he is." The defeat in her voice made my hands curl into fists. "We're not letting him take this from you." "Rosalie," she finally faced me, her eyes red-rimmed, but dry. "Your father built this place with me. His name is on everything. But it's your vision, your work. He just provided the money, and the connections, and the business plan. And—" She stopped herself, pressing her fingers to her temples. "I'm so tired." A knock at the door interrupted us. Tom stood there, tablet in hand, looking apologetic. "Sorry, but you need to see this." He handed me the tablet, open to a business news website. The headline made my stomach drop. "Wellness Empire Shakeup. Daniel announces innovative restructuring plan with new partner." There was a photo of my father and Evelyn, both smiling professionally at some press conference I hadn't known about. The article detailed their vision for modernization and strategic rebranding. "He's moving fast," Tom said quietly. "He always does." I scrolled through the article, noting how it painted my mother as resistant to change, stuck in outdated methods. "This is character assassination." "It's smart business," my mother said, her voice suddenly stronger. "He's controlling the narrative before we can." "Then let's fight back. We have proof of his financial misconduct, which would destroy the center's reputation completely." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "No, we need to be smarter than that." Tom cleared his throat. "I might have an idea. The tech startup I work for, they've been looking to partner with wellness brands. If we could secure independent backing, he'd lose his leverage," I finished, something like hope flickering in my chest. My mother shook her head. "Daniel would never allow it. He wouldn't have a choice if we had majority support from the board," I countered. "Tom, how quickly could you set up a meeting?" Before he could answer, my father's voice cut through the room. "Planning a coup already." He stood in the doorway, Evelyn hovering behind him like a shadow. He'd always known how to make an entrance. "Just discussing business," my mother replied, her spine straightening. "Since you're so fond of doing that these days." "Monica." He stepped into the office, his expensive cologne filling the space. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sign over your controlling interest. Take the settlement I'm offering, and we can all move forward amicably." "Amicably?" I laughed. "Like how you amicably humiliated her at the gala." His jaw tightened. "You're emotional, Rosalie." "This isn't personal." "Everything about this is personal," I snapped, "including how you've been cooking the books for years." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Careful, daughter. Accusations like that can have serious consequences." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reminder that family loyalty goes both ways." Tom moved closer to me, his presence steady and grounding. My father's gaze flickered to him, then back to me, calculating. "Young man," he said smoothly, "I hope you understand what you're getting involved with here. Career opportunities can be fragile things. So can reputations," I countered, feeling Tom's hand brush against mine. "Especially when built on lies." My father smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Monica, you've taught our daughter well. She has your passionate nature. But passion doesn't build empires." "No," my mother said quietly, "but it can tear them down." He stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing between them. Then he turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. "The board meets tomorrow at 9. I trust you'll both make the right decision." His voice softened, almost genuine. "I'd hate to see either of you hurt by this." After he left, the silence felt thick enough to choke on. Evelyn's perfume lingered, mixing with my father's cologne, in a way that made me nauseous. "Mom." I waited until she looked at me. "What do you want to do?" She walked to the wall of achievements, touching one frame gently. "I want to burn it all down," she whispered, "and build something better from the ashes." I shared a look with Tom, seeing my own determination reflected in his eyes. The game had changed, and so had the players. My father thought he was the only one who knew how to destroy things. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The files spread across Tom's apartment floor told a story my father never wanted revealed. Bank statements, property records, shell company documents, all pointing to years of systematic fraud. My hands trembled as I connected the dots. He's been laundering money through the wellness center, I said, my voice hollow, using client payments to fund his private ventures. Tom sat cross-legged beside me, frowning at his laptop screen. The pattern goes back at least 5 years. Look at these transfers to offshore accounts. The numbers blurred before my eyes. Each transaction represented another betrayal, another lie. My mother's life's work had been nothing but a front for my father's schemes. My phone buzzed. Another message from my grandmother, Linda. She'd been trying to reach me all day, probably worried after the board meeting disaster. I ignored it. There's something else, Tom said quietly. He turned the laptop toward me. These payments to a company called Phoenix Holdings. They started right after your mother opened her first clinic. I leaned closer, scanning the records. I've never heard of them, because they don't exist, at least not legally. But they've received millions from the wellness center's accounts. A knock at the door made us both jump. Tom moved to answer it, while I quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into a folder. But instead of the takeout we'd ordered, my mother stood in the doorway, looking pale. "Mom, what are you—" "Your father knows," she cut me off, stepping inside. "Someone told him you've been investigating the accounts." My stomach dropped. "How?" "Evelyn saw you accessing the financial records after hours." She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture I'd never seen before. "He's calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. He's going to force a sale of the entire company." "He can't do that without shareholder approval," Tom interjected. My mother laughed bitterly. "He already has it. Remember those investment partners he brought in last year? Turns out they're all connected to Phoenix Holdings." The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the floor. "You know about Phoenix?" She went very still. "What do you know about it?" "Only that it's been receiving regular payments since the beginning." I studied her face. "Mom, what aren't you telling me?" She sank onto Tom's couch, suddenly looking every bit her age. "Phoenix Holdings was your father's insurance policy, his way of maintaining control, even if something happened to him." She took a shaky breath. "I signed the papers without reading them properly. I trusted him." "What papers?" "A contract giving Phoenix Holdings veto power over any major business decisions. I thought it was just standard legal protection." She pressed her fingers to her temples. "I was so naive." Tom cleared his throat. "There might be a way to invalidate the contract if we can prove fraud." "And destroy everything in the process?" My mother shook her head. "Daniel would rather burn it all down than lose control." "Then let him burn," I said, my voice hard. "We'll build something new." "Rosalie," she started, but my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. "Grandma, I can't talk right now." "Listen to me," she cut in, her voice urgent. "Your father just left our house. He's been asking about the old clinic records, the ones from before the merger." My blood went cold. Those records were stored in the wellness center's basement archive. Records that would show every transaction, every client payment, the evidence, I whispered. "He's going to destroy it all." I was already grabbing my coat when Tom caught my arm. "You can't go alone." "He's right." My mother stood. "Daniel will be expecting you." "Good." I pulled away, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Because I'm done playing defense. If he wants to burn it all down, then he'd better be ready for the flames." "Rosalie, wait." But I was already out the door, Tom's footsteps echoing behind me. My grandmother's voice followed me down the hallway. "There's something else you need to know about Phoenix Holdings." But I didn't stop to listen. I had 20 minutes to reach the center before my father destroyed everything we needed to expose him. 20 minutes to decide how far I was willing to go to stop him. As Tom and I raced through the darkening city, I realized I already knew the answer. My father had taught me well. Sometimes you have to destroy something to save it. I just hoped I could live with whatever was left in the ashes. The basement archives smelled like mold and secrets. Tom kept watch near the stairs while I rifled through filing cabinets, my phone's flashlight casting long shadows across decades of paperwork. Every minute felt like an hour, knowing my father could arrive any moment. Then I found it, a thick manila envelope labeled Phoenix Holdings, Initial Agreement. My hands shook as I pulled out the contents, but before I could read them, voices echoed from above. "Check the basement," my father's voice commanded. "Every document related to the original clinic needs to go." I switched off my light, heart pounding. Tom's footsteps crossed the floor above, deliberately loud, buying me time. I shoved the envelope into my jacket and crouched behind a shelf, listening to multiple sets of feet descending the stairs. "Sir, the security cameras show your daughter's car in the parking lot." Evelyn's voice carried down. "Of course they do." My father's laugh was cold. "She's becoming predictable, just like her mother." The basement lights flickered on. I pressed myself against the wall, trapped between metal shelving and concrete. Through the gaps, I could see my father's expensive shoes moving between the aisles. "You can come out, Rosalie," he called. "We both know how this ends." I stayed silent, counting heartbeats. Tom's voice drifted down. "Sir, I think I saw movement upstairs." "Check it," my father ordered someone. Footsteps retreated up the stairs. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he continued, closer now. "Did your mother ever tell you why we named the company Phoenix Holdings?" My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from my grandmother. "Phoenix was your mother's dream before he stole it." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. I stood up, stepping into view. "It was her idea, wasn't it?" My voice was steady, despite the rage building in my chest. "The whole wellness concept. But you needed startup capital, so you made her sign everything over to your holding company." He smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "Business is about opportunity, daughter. Your mother had vision, but I had the means to make it real." "You mean you had the means to steal it?" "I protected her from her own naivety." He moved closer, blocking my path to the stairs. "Just like I'm protecting you now. Walk away from this, Rosalie. There's still a place for you in the company's future." "Next to Evelyn?" I laughed. "How generous." His expression hardened. "You're more like me than you realize. We both know what needs to be done to succeed." "I am nothing like you." "No?" He gestured around the basement. "Then why are you here, in the dark, plotting revenge?" "That's exactly what I would do." The truth of his words hit like a physical blow. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "What are you doing?" His voice sharpened. "Proving you wrong." I pressed send on a pre-written message. Upstairs, multiple phones chimed simultaneously. "What did you just do?" "I sent copies of everything, the fraud records, the Phoenix documents, everything, to every board member and the SEC. My hands were steady now. "You taught me about opportunity, remember?" His face went white. "You're bluffing." "Check your phone." He pulled it out, scrolling rapidly. I watched the realization hit him, followed by something I'd never seen before. Fear. "You'll destroy everything," he whispered. "The company, your mother's work." "No," I cut him off. "I'm saving it. From you." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Tom appeared first, followed by my mother and grandmother Linda. My father's expression shifted from fear to fury as he saw them. "Monica," he started, but she held up her hand. "I remember why we chose the name Phoenix," she said quietly. "Because something new rises from the ashes." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry I waited so long to let it burn." My grandmother stepped forward, her presence filling the small space. "Daniel, the board is waiting upstairs, along with some very interested federal agents." He straightened his jacket, mask sliding back into place. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed, "but it's changing." As he climbed the stairs, defeated but still dangerous, my mother touched my arm. "Are you sure about this?" I pulled out the Phoenix Holdings envelope, finally understanding its true weight. Sometimes the only way to honor something is to let it go. The basement lights flickered again, shadows dancing across walls that had held our secrets for too long. It was time to step into the light. The media storm hit faster than any of us expected. 3 days after the federal agents arrived at the wellness center, my father's empire began crumbling in real time across every news outlet in the city. But watching him fall wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. "Your father's legal team is requesting a private meeting," Tom said, setting his laptop aside. We were in his apartment, surrounded by takeout containers and newspaper clippings. "They're offering a deal." I kept my eyes on the TV, where another business analyst was dissecting my father's downfall. "No deals, Rosalie." He moved closer, blocking my view. "They're threatening to release information about your mother's early involvement in some questionable investments." My head snapped up. "What?" "Your father's lawyers sent this an hour ago." He handed me his phone. The email contained scanned documents showing my mother's signature on several suspicious transactions, dated years before I was born. "These are forged," I said, but my voice wavered. The signatures looked real. Maybe, but the damage would be done before we could prove it. My phone buzzed, Evelyn's number. I'd been ignoring her calls all week, but something made me answer this time. "What do you want?" "To help you understand what you're really destroying." Her voice was eerily calm. "Your father isn't the only one who knows where bodies are buried, Rosalie. Did you ever wonder how your mother afforded her first clinic?" My stomach churned. "Don't try to manipulate me." "Manipulation implies deception. I'm offering truth. Meet me at the old clinic site in an hour. Come alone, or those documents go public tonight." She hung up before I could respond. Tom watched me carefully, reading my expression. "You're not going." "I have to." I stood up, grabbing my keys. "If there's any chance those documents are real, then we handle it together," he insisted. "This is exactly what they want. To isolate you, make you vulnerable." "I'm already vulnerable." The words burst out louder than intended. "Everything I've done to protect my mother might end up destroying her instead." His phone chimed with a news alert. The headline made my blood run cold. "Wellness Empire Scandal Deepens. Sources reveal founder's dark origins." "They're not waiting," I whispered. "They're starting to leak it now." "Then we fight back. We have proof of your father's fraud. And he has proof my mother isn't innocent either." I grabbed my coat. "I need to know the truth before I decide our next move." "Rosalie, wait." But I was already out the door, my grandmother's words echoing in my head. Sometimes the past needs to stay buried. The old clinic site was deserted, a shell of concrete, and memories waiting for demolition. Evelyn stood near the boarded-up entrance, elegant, even in crisis. She held a thick folder. "Your mother was brilliant," she said as I approached. "But brilliance often requires compromise. What do you want?" "To offer you a choice." She opened the folder. "These documents show everything. How your mother partnered with some questionable investors to start her first clinic. How your father helped cover it up in exchange for control. A perfect foundation for your parents' empire of lies." My hands clenched into fists. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're about to repeat history." She smiled sadly. "You think exposing your father will bring justice. You'll only prove that success requires sacrifice, usually of principles. You don't know me. I know you're becoming him, using other people's secrets as weapons, justifying destruction in the name of justice." She held out the folder. "Take it. Decide if vengeance is worth burning down everything your mother built." I stared at the folder, understanding the weight of what it contained. Not just evidence of past sins, but a mirror reflecting what I was becoming. My phone buzzed again, a message from my grandmother. "Your grandfather wants to tell you about Phoenix's real beginning. Come home." Looking up, I saw something shift in Evelyn's expression. Fear, maybe, or recognition that she wasn't the only one holding cards. "Keep your folder," I said quietly. "I'm done playing with shadows." Her composure cracked slightly. "You don't want to make us your enemy." "No," I agreed. turning away. I want to be nothing like you at all. As I walked back to my car, sirens wailed in the distance. The past was racing to catch up with all of us, and I wasn't sure anymore who would survive its arrival. But for the first time since this started, I wondered if survival was what I should be fighting for. The emergency board meeting felt like a funeral. I sat beside my mother, watching our world collapse in neat PowerPoint slides and legal jargon. My father stood at the head of the table, every inch the concerned businessman, as he detailed our gross mismanagement of company resources. The evidence is clear, he concluded, clicking to a final slide showing plummeting stock values. For the good of all stakeholders, immediate action is required. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. The board members avoided eye contact, their silence a preview of their votes. Before we proceed, Evelyn stood, distributing folders. There's additional documentation regarding unauthorized access to company files and potential corporate espionage. My mother's hand found mine under the table. The folders contained screenshots of my late-night database searches, emails between Tom and me, even surveillance photos of us leaving the building with documents. This isn't about corporate espionage, I said, my voice sharp in the quiet room. This is about covering up years of fraud, alleged fraud, my father corrected smoothly. Unlike these documented security breaches, a board member cleared his throat. Miss Walker, these accusations against your father are quite serious. Do you have concrete evidence? Before I could answer, the conference room door burst open. Tom stood there, face pale. The federal investigation has been suspended, he announced. All charges dropped. The room tilted sideways. That's impossible. We had proof, which has been deemed inadmissible, my father said, allowing himself a small smile, due to the manner in which it was obtained. You can't just make federal charges disappear, I protested. But the certainty in his expression told me otherwise. The Wellness Center will, of course, cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation, he continued. But in the meantime, we must address the immediate leadership crisis. The vote was quick and brutal. Within 15 minutes, my mother was removed from her position, and I was suspended pending an investigation into corporate espionage charges. You'll receive severance packages reflecting your years of service, Evelyn said, as if she were doing us a favor. My mother stood silently, gathering her things. I remained frozen, watching my father's triumph play out exactly as he'd planned. One more thing, he added, almost casually. The board should know about Phoenix Holdings' original funding sources. My mother's bag slipped from her fingers. Daniel, don't. Your mother's brilliant vision required certain compromises in the beginning, he told the room. Compromises I helped conceal out of love, but given recent events, full disclosure seems appropriate. Stop, I whispered, understanding too late the depth of his cruelty. He projected a new document onto the screen. A loan agreement with names I recognized from old crime reports. My mother's signature glared from the bottom, dated 25 years ago. Sometimes desperation makes us vulnerable to unfortunate influences, he said softly. I protected you then, Monica. I'm protecting you now. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a mix of shock and disappointment. Everything I'd done to expose my father had given him the perfect weapon to destroy my mother instead. You're right. My mother finally spoke, her voice steady. I was desperate then, but not as desperate as you are now. She walked to the door, head high. I moved to follow, but my father's voice stopped me. Rosalie, he waited until I looked at him. You wanted truth. There it is. The wellness empire you've been so eager to save was built on corruption from the very beginning. The only difference is, I was honest about who I am. What's your excuse? The words hit like physical blows, each one perfectly aimed. I'd tried to play his game and lost completely, destroying not just him, but everything my mother had worked for. Tom touched my arm, trying to guide me out, but I shrugged him off. Through the glass walls, I could see reporters gathering in the lobby. drawn by rumors of the emergency meeting. The press will want statements, Evelyn said, checking her phone. We should prepare. Let them wait, my father cut her off, still watching me. Family matters should be handled privately, don't you think? I met his gaze one last time, seeing not the monster I'd imagined, but something worse, a reflection of what I was becoming. The realization felt like drowning. Without a word, I walked out of the conference room, leaving behind the ruins of everything I'd tried to protect. The cameras started flashing before I reached the lobby, capturing the moment my father's daughter finally learned the true cost of revenge. My grandmother's hand shook as she placed the old leather journal on her kitchen table. Your grandfather kept records of everything, she said quietly, including what really happened the night Phoenix Holdings was created. Outside, rain pelted against windows that had witnessed 25 years of family secrets. Tom sat beside me while my mother stood by the sink, arms wrapped around herself. Daniel didn't just steal the company, Grandma Linda continued. He stole it from his own brother. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. My father had never mentioned having a brother. Michael was the one who introduced your parents, my grandmother explained, opening the journal. He and your mother developed the wellness center concept together. They were going to be partners. What happened to him? I asked, though part of me already knew. There was a car accident. She met my mother's eyes. The night before, the contracts were supposed to be signed. My mother's glass slipped from her hand, shattering in the sink. The brake lines, she whispered. They said the brake lines were faulty. The front door opened, and my father's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. They were. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. Evelyn wasn't with him. Hello, Daniel, my grandmother said coldly. We were just discussing family history. Were you? He stepped inside, eyes fixed on the journal, telling stories about poor Michael, how tragic, how convenient his death was. You killed your own brother, I said, the words tasting like poison. I protected our legacy. He moved closer, each step deliberate. Michael was weak, idealistic. He would have run the business into the ground with his ridiculous ethical standards. He was going to expose your connections to the mob, my grandmother snapped. The same ones you used to force Monica into that first loan. Tom's hand found mine under the table as my father laughed, a hollow, dangerous sound. And now history repeats itself, he said. Another idealistic fool trying to destroy what I've built. Tell me, Rosalie, do you think you're avenging your uncle, a man you never even knew existed? I'm not here for revenge anymore. I stood slowly. I'm here for justice. Justice. He spat the word. There's no justice in business. Only survivors and victims. Your mother understood that when she signed those papers after Michael's death. She chose to survive. I chose to protect my daughter. My mother's voice cracked. You said if I didn't sign, they'd come after her next. My father's expression softened for a moment, almost genuine. Everything I did for this family. No. I pulled out my phone, showing him the recording icon. Everything you did for yourself, and you just confessed to all of it. The mask slipped. He lunged for the phone, but Tom was faster, blocking his path. It's already uploaded, Tom said quietly, to the FBI and every major news outlet. You think a recording will be enough? My father straightened his jacket, composure returning. I've survived worse. Not this time. My grandmother opened the journal to its final pages. Henry didn't just record what happened to Michael. He recorded where the evidence is buried. Something flickered in my father's eyes. Fear, real fear, for the first time. The original contracts, she continued. The threatening letters, the brake line fragments Henry collected from the accident site. All safely stored where you'd never think to look. In the Wellness Center's foundation, I finished. Right beneath the Phoenix Holdings plaque. Grandpa was an engineer, after all. The rain grew louder, drowning out the sound of approaching sirens. My father looked at each of us, his wife, his daughter, his mother, seeing strangers where family used to be. You're right about one thing, I said softly. There are survivors and victims. But sometimes the victims survive and learn to fight back. He smiled then, a genuine smile that chilled me more than any threat. You really are my daughter. No, my mother stepped forward, taking my hand. She's Michael's niece and my daughter, and that's why she won. The sirens grew closer. My father straightened his tie one last time, dignity intact even in defeat. The thing about phoenixes, he said, as federal agents appeared in the doorway, is that they always rise again. Not from these ashes, my grandmother replied, closing the journal on 25 years of secrets and lies. As they led him away, I realized the rain had stopped. Sometimes the storm has to break before you can see the light. The demolition crew found Uncle Michael's evidence exactly where Grandpa Henry said it would be, sealed in a steel box beneath the Phoenix Holdings plaque. I watched them extract it from the foundation, thinking how symbols rarely match reality. The new design looks promising, Tom said, unrolling blueprints across my grandmother's kitchen table. The wellness center's renovation plans showed open spaces, natural light, everything my mother had originally dreamed of. Michael would have loved it, my grandmother said, touching the paper gently. She'd aged years in the weeks since my father's arrest, but her eyes were clearer now. My mother entered, still wearing her court clothes. The board approved the restructuring. We can start rebuilding next month. Any word from Evelyn? I asked. She's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. My mother sat heavily. She had her own evidence, apparently, had been collecting it for years. Insurance, my grandmother muttered. She learned from the best. The doorbell rang. Tom answered it, returning with a package marked with the Federal Detention Center's address. My father's handwriting covered the label. You don't have to open it, my mother said softly. But I did. Inside was his journal, not the polished business diaries he kept for show, but a raw account of everything. The first entry was dated the night of Michael's death. He wants us to understand, I realized, flipping through pages of justifications and rationalizations. He still thinks he can explain it all away. Some things can't be explained, my grandmother said. Only atoned for. A note fell from the journal's final pages. 4 words in my father's precise handwriting. You became the phoenix. He's not wrong, Tom said quietly. You did rise from the ashes. I closed the journal, thinking of all the ways revenge had changed me. Some I was proud of, others that still haunted me. We all did, my mother corrected, but not the way Daniel expected. The construction crews outside began dismantling the old signage. Through the window, I watched the Phoenix Holdings logo crash to the ground, breaking into pieces that caught the morning light. I've been thinking about new names for the center, my mother continued. Something that honors Michael's original vision. Keep Phoenix, I said, surprising myself, but make it mean something different, something true. My grandmother smiled, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. It wasn't revenge that saved us in the end, I replied. It was truth, even if it hurt to find it. Tom spread out another blueprint, this one showing the memorial garden planned for the center's entrance. Michael's name would be there, along with the real story of how Phoenix began. Your father's trial starts next week, my mother reminded me gently. Are you ready to testify? I touched the journal, feeling its weight. I'm ready to tell the truth, all of it, including my part in everything that happened. You were protecting your family, my grandmother insisted. So was he in his way. I stood, moving to the window. The difference is, I learned to protect without destroying. He never did. Outside, workers were clearing away the broken sign pieces, making room for something new. My phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. There's more you should know when you're ready. I showed it to my mother, who nodded slowly. There always is. The question is, what do we do with it? We learn from it, I said, deleting the message. But we don't let it consume us. The morning light stretched across the kitchen floor, touching the blueprints, the journal, the scattered pieces of our shared history. Soon we would rebuild the wellness center, tell Michael's story, face my father in court. But in that moment, watching shadows retreat from the light, I understood something my quest for revenge had almost cost me. Sometimes, justice isn't about what you destroy, but what you choose to preserve. I left my father's journal on the table, unopened. Some stories don't need to be read to be understood. Some phoenixes rise not from destruction, but from the choice to stop burning. Outside, the demolition continued, making way for new foundations. This time, we would build them in the light.